Good afternoon, everybody. Dave Walker here with the B2SMB Institute, and I am thrilled to be joined by Mr. Russ Swanson from TrustRadius to talk about some of the recent research they've done on B2B buying behavior, something that I know is all top of mind for all of us as we try to put forward our strategies and plans and tactics for 2021. It's always good to do that on a fact-based basis. So without further ado, good morning, Russ. How are you?
I'm great, Dave. It is good to see you. It is good to be here and just delighted to be able to talk about this topic. You know how much I geek out on this sort of research.
as I do as well. So we may geek each other out here. But first, I have to geek out a little bit around all the guitars in the background. So does a family member play, or do you play?
I play whenever I can. I've been playing since I was very young and collecting. So it's many years of, collecting that you see on the wall behind me.
That's awesome. Well, you will probably win of the sessions that we'll do for the Forward 21 conference. I have a feeling you might just win the background award for having the best background. But listen, do our audience a favor. I'm fairly certain that many of them have heard of TrustRadius, of course, but give us the 411 on you, on TrustRadius, and then set us up to talk about the research and survey that you guys did.
Sure thing. Well, first off, TrustRadius is a B2B review site for B2B technology. So we cover all manner of things from, categories such as firewall, marketing automation, business intelligence, any category of software or hardware that you might be interested in. We have 1.2 million visitors monthly. So a lot of people use us as a tool as they research and buy. And that's super important because as I look at your mission and who you serve many large companies like Cisco, IBM, et cetera, that also are customers of ours, that through sites like TrustRadius are connecting with their audience and reaching their potential buyers there. So that's what we do. And I run marketing for the company. And part of that, we have a wonderful, wonderful research team that loves to understand buying trends in the market. And so I have the advantage that I have all of their insight to get to talk about from time to time.
That's terrific. I had the good fortune of, and I try to uh, do my own navigating around the web on topics of interest and subjects that would be relevant to our audience pretty much every day. And I came across your research. I believe it was back in early December. When did you guys publish it?
We published it right, I think it was at the end of November. We do this as an
Okay.
annual report that's a survey of how people are buying, considering and buying technology. So
Right.
we've done it, I think, 4 years running.
Yeah, and this was the first one that I had seen, so shame on me for it being the first one that I'd ever seen. But you had just a terrific summary of some of the observations, executive summary of the observations that you guys saw as you really were examining B2B buying behavior. And and just for clarification, when you talk B2B, do you take in the full spectrum of business size on either side of that equation? In other words, are small to mid-sized businesses included in your research, or is it merely large enterprises?
That's a great question. So businesses of all sizes are included in the research, and we do at parts of the research break that out so we can see different trends by different sizes. Our customers, the folks that pay us to connect with their audience, tend to be mid-market or larger.
Hmm.
But if you just read reviews, in each review on TrustRadius will cite, the company that they worked for, who they are, and you see a lot of small and mid-sized companies in there weighing in with their reviews and their opinions. And that's important because if you're buying technology, you don't really care as much if it has 4 stars, 5 stars, as much as you care about, did this work for someone like you, right?
Right,
So
right. That's a great observation. Well, let me kick it off. I'm gonna read to you some of the nice pithy observations that you made from your own research and talk about it, have you expand on each one of them in turn. One of the first ones was the role that millennials have in the new B2B marketplace and how they're really changing it. Talk about that. How are they changing it?
they're changing it in so many ways. And first off, we have to deprogram ourselves from the idea that millennials are kids going around ordering avocado toast and, still on their parents' health insurance. No, the millennials now are, 40 years old or even older at the outside edge. They're mid-career, they have mortgages, they have jobs, they have kids, and they're like any other generation in that regard, meaning that when they make a technology investment, for their company, they want to make sure they're making a good decision because their career hinges on it, right?
Mhm.
And so with that, they have that in common with other generations. What they don't have in common is the same evaluation process.
Okay.
Now, I have been marketing technology for a very long time. And so, we're all very familiar with, the world of Gartner, Forrester, et cetera, the
Hmm.
analyst ecosystem. Millennials place very little stock in that. Fewer than 1 in 5 even look at it. But the things they do care about, they also tend to ignore companies' marketing, frankly. And
Hmm.
that's hard for me because I'm a marketer, right?
Right.
But what they look at are a couple of things. They look at firsthand experience. They want to get their hand on the product. They want to see a demo and see how it works. And they want to hear from people like themselves and understand, did this product work for someone like me? So they trust peers, they trust firsthand, they're skeptical of nearly anything else.
So, in the try before you buy concept that I think I've observed a lot amongst millennial buyers, are they uh, are they asking for free trials? Are they asking for trials with some sort of minimal upfront payment or easy to cancel? Are they expressing kind of like how do they want to be served that kind of that trial period?
That's a really good question. And of course, it depends a little bit based on what you sell, because some types of software, it's hard to do a free trial. Others, it's very
Hmm.
easy. But what they want is, I think, a really reasonable thing to want. They want to be sure before they put their money down. So if possible, a free trial is great. If not, they'll understand, they're not unreasonable, but what proof can you give them ahead of time that this will meet their needs?
Hmm.
Can you do a pilot? Can you do a paid pilot? And an important trend is they like to do the research and the journey on their terms. And so the more they feel like they're being put into a funnel of here's our process, the more they may resist. And instead, you've got to be there as a guide to take them where they want to go, rather than to drive them to here's our free funnel and here's how on day 21 we start trying to convert you to a paid buyer. You've got to let them drive a little bit more.
Yeah, the self control I think is the really the key there. So let's talk a little bit poorly about our our chosen professions of marketing. Spend a moment there. Your second key observation was how much tech buyers just absolutely despise most marketing tactics thrown at them. Which ones in particular would you say are the top three that raise their blood pressure the most?
That's a really good question, and it obviously varies a little bit. But one thing they hate is, especially as we've moved away from events due to COVID, right?
Mhm.
Everybody has amped up their other marketing tactics. So people's inboxes are jammed. And to a millennial, especially, or a younger person, the email inbox isn't even the primary inbox. The text tends to be the primary inbox. So they hate over aggressive email marketing. Similarly, they really dislike being cold called. That's harder now because most people are, on their phones. That said, cold calls do tend to work, which is interesting as you talk to sales
Mhm.
development organizations. So some of it is timing and knowing if people are interested. They really, increasingly more than other generations, despise sort of the aggressively pushy sales rep. And that's not surprising when we think of the dichotomy between I want to choose my own journey and I'm going to be taken down a funnel. And when you talk to them, there are two things they dislike. They dislike an uninformed sales pitch. You better know about them. You better know about their business and their problem.
Mhm.
And they really dislike non-personalized communications. And that last one is really important to get right, because as marketers, it is really easy to say, oh, we personalize everything, when it is variable, variable, variable. Hi, Bob. Hope you're having a good day at Megacorp. Wanted to talk to you about your business strategy. They see right through that level of personalization. And
Mm-hmm.
what really works, and I'm seeing this work with our business development team, is understanding the business and reaching out with something truly personalized in terms of, I was looking at your site, I was looking at your competition, I was looking at traffic to your category, and I noticed some insights that might help you. So if they hate if they hate unpersonalized stuff, they love it when the personalization adds value, when it's truly about the business problem and not just plugging in your name.
Is there, as someone who I'm sure lives this, I think the latest stat I saw was that 65% of B2B buyers have made up their mind before they make their first contact with an actual sales representative within a company. Are you seeing specifically marketing tactics that really cover that 65% that are particularly effective, that get them to the point where they actually will pick up the phone? On the positive side, what's you mentioned some things that are working. What are some other things that are working?
I mean, that's a really good question, because we feel so powerless as marketers when we go,
Hmm.
2/3 of people never going to talk to us. They're already going to have made up their mind. But this is where using things like intent data can be extremely helpful, because you can start to understand who's in market.
Hmm.
So, and if you understand who's in market for a solution, they may not be looking at your website, but they'll be looking at third-party websites like TrustRadius and engaging and reading comparisons. The more you have that detailed downstream intent data, the more you know where that buyer is, and you can reach them with the appropriate tactic. Maybe it
Hmm.
is retargeting that audience. Maybe it is personalized one-to-one outreach. But just imagine the difference, and we've all been cold called by somebody selling something totally irrelevant to us. And
Hmm.
then we've also been called by somebody where it's like, man, the timing is just right to discuss
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
So we can look at the market, we can look at the behavior through intent data and understand when the time is just right, and even understand, are they looking at my solution,
Hmm.
or are they comparing a bunch of solutions? Are they way up top looking at a topic, or are they downstream looking at specific potential solutions to their problem? And that's a non-invasive tactic that can let you be the right person in the right place at the right time.
So, and that all makes perfect sense. Just to branch a little bit here, we certainly read a lot about the application of artificial intelligence in the marketing efforts that you just described. Trying to establish that moment of need and that intent, and that yes, this is exactly what they're doing, and here's the appropriate kind of I don't want to say programmatic response, but at least the enabled response that our artificial intelligence could apply. Are you do you Because I don't feel confident that I really understand how AI is actually being applied to marketing. Do you? And if you do, what's the role of AI in really kind of enhancing this marketing that really is becoming so different, especially in the B2B market space?
It's a really good question. And a friend of mine that's in this space has a joke where he says, machine learning is a technique that you use in an application, and AI is a term that you put in a PowerPoint. And beyond that, there's not much
Right,
different. But
right.
no, it's a super good question. I think the key thing to remember is, machine learning and AI can be a great way of processing information and recognizing patterns that can help you take action. And there's some wonderful, wonderful tools made for that that are available to marketers. But it's only as good as your inputs.
Hmm.
And when we look at, I'm just going to hammer on intent data for a moment, just because that's what
Hmm.
makes me think of, one thing that you put into an AI system. if all you have is top of funnel, this person read 30 articles about marketing automation, it doesn't tell you, it tells you they're super interested in the topic, but
Hmm.
doesn't tell you where they are in the journey.
Hmm.
And so, whatever systems people are using, it's important in my mind to use different sources from upstream to downstream so they can really understand where that buyer is in the journey. And then, whether it is just, a smart account scoring model, which, can be done, frankly, in a Google Sheet and Excel, or a super sophisticated, tool for crunching intent data and
Hmm.
determining buyer intent, then you've got enough good inputs to enable a good output.
Hmm.
But AI and machine learning, great tools. They are only tools, and they're only as good as the inputs you feed them.
I think it's great feedback. You identified five main sources that B2B buyers use in making their decisions. Um, Tell us what they are, first of all, and why they're in the top five. Why are they so relied upon by business buyers?
It's a good question. I'm looking over here because I've got them on another screen because unfortunately I no longer remember everything, Dave. But you know, first off, top is customer stories and case studies. They
Okay.
want to hear about somebody else that it worked for. So that would be number one. The second is customer reviews, which are just a version of that. And
Hmm.
just like when you and I go to a restaurant, we look at Yelp because we want a dispassionate,
Right.
third party viewpoint. They use that. Um, Digital events and webinars are something that are also people are using now that we've shifted out of the sort of physical event space for a period of time. They white papers, ebooks, informational stuff like that,
Hmm.
and just content, ungated blog content that people can use to read about the problem and solve their way to their own solution. Those are tactics that the B2B buyers use, the ones that tech vendors provide that buyers most rely on.
And is it your sense that, just across that spec as a great recap of the top five, the B2B buyers, what majority do you think are actually using those and using those on a consistent basis? Or is it, what we really found in the survey was that there's only a subset of about 12% that were actually, using these things. Others were just throwing darts against walls.
That's a good question. I mean, there's always the dart throwers, right? My favorite
Right.
stat, and it's not from this year's B2B Disconnect, it's from last year's. When we asked people what they did with them, we discovered that something like 7% of people print out reviews and share them. And that blows my mind that anybody prints anything out anymore. So I'm sure there's a percentage of dart throwers. But when you look at those sources, whether it's, demos, user reviews, et cetera, it seems like adoption is pretty high. We know
Yeah.
that for reviews, it's over 50%. We know that for product demos, 58% of the time, people want to see that, and it's a non-starter to move further if they can't get it.
Mhm.
So adoption seems relatively high across those few tactics on the buyer side. On the vendor side, sometimes it's different because it's so easy to fall in love with cool marketing technology that may or may not meet your buyer's needs.
Right, right, exactly. And listen, you guys are evidence with 1.2 million visitors a month that yeah, there's a real appetite for for reading reviews and using reviews. So we touched a little bit on this, but let's expand on this one because this is one of your other observations was the impact of self-service and the options of self-service that B2B buyers wanted. Is there It's relatively easy to understand how that works at top of funnel, but using that data point of 65% are fairly far down the funnel when they actually say, okay, now you can talk to me. Where do you see self-service fitting in? Is it across the full buying cycle, or is there some place where they all kind of say, okay, now I need somebody to talk to or to hold my hand?
It's a good question. Certainly the more you can apply it across the funnel, the full range of the funnel, the better off you are. There's a great book called Friction by Roger Dooley
Hmm.
about enabling people to buy by removing friction. And it's just common sense. if you have self-service options throughout, you will get people to opt in. But the flip side is that, technology is by its nature complicated. This is not a loaf of bread that we're buying. It's not a restaurant where if we make a bad choice, no big deal, we'll go to a better restaurant tomorrow. It's a big commitment. And so at a certain point, and it is that 2/3 of the way through the buy-in cycle, people do want a rep to step in and help and guide them and help them. They just won't take that person's, they'll check that person's guidance against what other people say to validate, and they will still want to an extent drive the process. And I see this on demo calls that I'm on now when we're talking with customers.
Mhm.
There's a lot less tolerance for let's have the dog and pony show up front. It's we're here, we're having a real conversation. I'm going to tell you about my business problems, and you're going to tell me how you might be able to help and solve them. So even that in the engagement with a rep is a form of self-service and bluntly respect for the customer by
Mhm.
letting them drive rather than trying to pitch them.
That's a great call out. I mean, I think self-service doesn't necessarily have to be you're not engaged as a seller. It just simply means that you're letting them serve their own buying journey, not you kind of dishing it up to them. Um, I want to talk about another observation, which I think is, again, one that I don't claim to have a great depth of knowledge of, but certainly this past year has opened up the topic of cybersecurity, data security immensely. As we've all been working from home, and I think we've all had to become, relatively savvy about it quickly. Um, you observed in the B2B buying space that data security concerns really were having a very big impact. How were they having an impact?
Well, it's a good question. There's sort of a couple of things driving it as I see it. One is there's legislation, right? You have GDPR in, the
Mhm.
EU, and you have CCPA in California. So the regulatory standards for how you handle customer data and proprietary data, those standards continue to rise. And customers now ask really tough and really informed questions about how do I know that my data is secure? Then, in terms of a perfect storm of data and privacy concerns, we also had COVID, where suddenly much of the world in technology started working from home, meaning that, for example, endpoint security, a specific category around not just are my servers secure, but are all of the laptops for my 1,000 employees around the globe
Mhm.
secure? We saw a tremendous rise in interest for that. And it's just sort of a perfect storm. Standards have risen. Consumers are less tolerant of data being abused and more aware of security breaches. Every single one is a big headline news. And we're suddenly in this new environment where if, I'm a CIO, CTO, suddenly I'm not just responsible for the network within my building. I have to think of where is my farthest flung employee and how good are they? Are they at keeping their data secure on their laptop? So that's just driven a whole lot of interest in the category, which is exciting, and it frankly drives a good opportunity and an opportunity for marketers to be more responsible with data.
Here's another kind of branch off question, but your response there just opened it up for me at least. Is the journey basically is the B2B behavior and expectation change when the buyer is in an unfamiliar territory, a product or a service that they really don't know very much about, versus a product or a service that they have a fundamental understanding of marketing or what they want to accomplish with marketing. So looking at marketing platforms is I don't want to say it's going to be easier, but it's certainly going to be easier than something like cybersecurity, which they may not have any familiarity with at all. Did the survey reveal any differences in the behaviors or expectations between kind of those two very different kinds of customers?
And you're saying, I want to make sure I'm crisp on this, between perhaps the customer that is fairly informed about their category
Mhm.
and people buying something like security, where there's a lot of frankly, black box elements.
A lot of black box and a lot of snake oil, both. I mean, there's all those kind of things that really they would have obviously have a very high concern about.
Yeah, and I think across the board, we see, sales cycles slowing down and people consuming, I think it's 7 or 8 sources of information
Mhm.
informing a purchase, where just a couple of years ago it was 5. So people are choosing more validation points. But I think, although I haven't sliced the data, the intuition behind what you asked is that increase in consideration is not evenly distributed. For certain categories like security, it is probably a lot more information that they need, because this is a your money or your life decision, as Google would put it, right? And
Right.
therefore they have to get it right.
Yep. So, and again, speaking of really this past year, the the pandemic had so many different enormous impacts in the B2B space, particularly in the B to SMB space, just based on the health of the market, the health of small businesses in general. Um, it it clearly changed the buyer's journey, quote buyer's journey. What did you observe in the changes as the year went on, from lockdown to slight opening to economic, doldrums to sort of recovery to, gee, I wish this year would get over with. There's a whole long kind of chronological journey, but how did the buyers really change as the year went on with their expectations and behaviors?
Really, your question can be summarized as, let's narrate the roller coaster, because it was an absolute roller coaster.
Right.
And, few things, we saw surges in certain categories being researched at various times. So as the world started going remote in mid-March, we saw massive spikes in consideration for cybersecurity, endpoint security, video conferencing. And those things create winners and losers, right? And if
Mhm.
there is one winner out of all of that, it is certainly Zoom. There are many other fine companies in the category with great products, but they managed to become the Scotch tape of video conferencing through
Mhm.
that. Frankly, through, I think, some pretty smart moves in terms of making it available to educational institutions, et
Right.
cetera. So
Right.
there was this initial surge of, how do we keep doing business? How do we
Mhm.
connect on video? How do we keep our business secure? Then there was, how do we cut budgets to the bone to make sure that whatever happens, we're prepared for it? Then there was, how do we prepare and time for recovery? And there were a lot of also sort of company dynamics in terms of people changing what they believed would work. As an example, we were always a company that was office centric. We had a few remote people. I had, 2 on my team, and one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. So tiny teams spread across 4 time zones or whatever.
Mhm.
But we were an office centric company. And what was interesting, and this is my personal experience, is how quickly we were able, and other businesses were able, to pivot and recognize the work is the same. You and
Mhm.
I are no longer sitting across a desk. We're no longer whiteboarding, which is, if I miss one thing, I got to say it's whiteboards. But
Mhm.
the collaboration is still the same. And seeing a whole bunch of the business community make that pivot was inspiring. Another thing that I noticed, another part of the roller coaster that resonated for me personally,
Mhm.
was we started noticing that people were getting burned out, because people in startups work hard. You know this. People in small businesses work hard. We all work really, really hard to do what we do because we love our work and we take pride in it.
Mhm.
But we discovered it was harder for people to unplug, when the commute is from your bedroom to your office or whatever. And we started doing things like putting in monthly self-care days where we just had a company mandated day off to ensure that everybody unplugged. And that was another piece of the roller coaster. First, we secured the infrastructure with video conferencing and security and such. Then we said, how do we adjust financial plan and keep
Hmm.
tweaking it on a dime? And then we said, and how do we make sure that people, can continue coping and working? And for us, those were great lessons because we learned we can do well remote. We learned we can crush our pre-COVID sales plan, despite the fact that we initially took our numbers down. We found ourselves doing much better than we had expected. So it's been fun to see the businesses that have, survived and thrived through these times. And also, heartrending as you look at SMBs that are
Hmm.
dependent on foot traffic and have had a much, much harder time of it.
Have buyers in this past year become more demanding, or are they equally demanding as they've ever been? It's just different things that they're demanding.
That's a really good question. Um, I kind of think, and this goes to, again, the millennial buyer wanting to see
Mhm.
proof, wanting to know that it works. There's probably less tolerance for things that don't work, less tolerance for things going wrong.
Mhm.
Because in a situation where, again, everybody's suddenly been budget constrained, I can't afford to make a bad technology investment. And I'd
Mhm.
rather slow down and make sure I get it right rather than buy something and say, oh, well, that didn't work very well, but we'll, buy something
Right.
else next year when the contract comes up.
Right. I don't think they rose to the level of being intolerant, but certainly impatient. And
Mhm.
many of the things that, were part of, quote, the dance, the sales dance, the buyer seller dance, were like, screw that. I don't want to do that anymore. I want quickly to have you understand what my needs are. I want to quickly establish whether or not your solution fits. And you should want to, Mr. Seller, you should want to know that as much as I do. There was kind of an impatience of it. Look, I don't want to spend a lot of time of you convincing me that what you have is what I need if I don't see it. Let's all move on. You move on to someone else who really wants it. But I do think that and this is just, we've both been around this space for a long, long time. Upon reflection, because I was asked this exact same question recently, I said, when I really think about it, no, I don't think they're more demanding. I just think they're demanding of different things. And as my good friend Maria Pergolino from Active Campaign says, and it's about bloody time. I mean, it's about time. We all kind of did this stuff that we really should have been doing all along. So you're bullish on 2021, particularly as relates to tech spending. Why?
Well, good question. Again, this goes back to the research. We've surveyed people and they've said they expect it to rebound big time in 2021. So that's one reason I'm bullish on it, is simply because the market says we think we will spend, I think there was 17% that said they thought they would spend less in 21 on marketing technology, but the remainder said it would stay the same or increase. So that's a strong signal when people say, yes, we're going to be ready to spend. Additionally, I think we have this opportunity because we will, you know, get vaccinated or whatever choices we make, and
Mhm.
we will come through the pandemic and we will be able to go out and have a beer again and sit in an office again. You'll notice how I prioritize those things, Dave. But
Those are my priorities.
they're good priorities, I like to think. But we have the opportunity to reinvent it.
Right.
So, it doesn't have to look like it used to look. It doesn't have to look like Cubeville. It it can be very different. We've learned the advantage of we can have a distributed team and it works great. So
Mhm.
that's going to create new needs. One of the areas I've been playing with things like, Jamboard and Miro, because as I mentioned, whiteboarding is a thing that I really miss. And
Mhm.
yet there's no reason with a little bit of technology, you can't do that with somebody that happens to be sitting across the country or on the other side of the pond from you. So that's going to create new buying opportunities, selling opportunities as well for the
Mhm.
companies that position themselves well to take advantage of that. Also, let's look at workflow, whether it be tools like Wrike, Asana, et cetera, tools
Mhm.
that help people coordinate and collaborate. Big upside there that I would see.
And do you think those changes that you're describing, do you think they're permanent, semi-permanent? Some will go, some will stay. what's your sense on these on the changes you just described?
It's a good question. I think this is actually an exciting time because we're going to get to choose. Every
Hmm.
single business owner, every single business executive, as they enter the new world, will get to say, what do we keep and what do we ditch? And maybe we ditch counting butts in seats, and maybe we keep, I can hire the best talent wherever they happen to be. And that is going to change. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's going to change the talent market because
Hmm.
it's really good to be the best, really easy to be the best demand generation person in Austin, Texas,
Hmm.
or the best content marketer in San Francisco. It's not easy. Those things are hard, but still we think of talent in local markets. And the world flattens when we don't have to do that anymore, and we can suddenly say, what if the best talent, what if the best content marketer lives in Boise? What if they live, in Tokyo? Why should that be a barrier to my being able to hire that person? Which means also that just like businesses need to specialize, talent will start specializing, and it will no longer be enough to be the best content marketer in your city. You will be the best content marketer at a really specific thing, specific skill set.
So across town from you, our friends at Indeed have noticed that, to your point, have noticed that over the course of the last year, that the importance of the geographic filter in selecting candidates has gone from being number two. Number one was pay rate. Number two was geography. So that has now dropped down out of the top 10. It literally almost has no meaning anymore because of precisely what you're describing. And to the positive, I don't know, how much hiring you've done in the last year. Those executives that I know from companies, again, somebody from across town, ShipStation, who've been hiring like crazy, they'll say that, hey, look, we're finding people we never would have even considered before because we don't have to really be bound by geography. We really can kind of go out and seek the best talent. So the win is really on both sides. Um,
And
well,
you
this
can't
is,
put that genie back in the bottle, right? I mean, once you
yeah,
have built a
how could you?
team,
Right. How could you? This has been terrific, man. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I think our audience will appreciate it immensely as well. How can they get access to the details of this TrustRadius B2B buyer disconnect report that you've done?
pretty easy. If you go just to trustradius.com, we have it on the blog there. It is downloadable. You can just search, Google, frankly, will take you to it as well.
Mhm.
2021 B2B Buying Disconnect.
Mhm.
We've also done some other things with it. We took some of the data from it and put it in slides for people to use in their sales kickoffs. And I've
Mhm.
got access to that. And I'm happy to share it with anybody. So go to the site. You can get the content there. You can also just hit me up. I'm Russ Somers on LinkedIn, so I'm super easy to connect with. And if you hit me up there, I'll be happy to connect people with resources as well.
Oh, that's awesome. I got one last question for you,
Go
a
for
big
it.
one that you can expound on or punt on. But it's somewhat selfish in that we just are wrapping up a summary presented next week along with our partners at Accenture, an analysis of the brand to small business disconnect. It's kind of it's
Hmm.
literally a gap analysis of, not dissimilar to the disconnect that you guys have analyzed in B2B, in B2B buying. We're kind of trying to establish, even at a higher level, trust between
Mhm.
the brands and enterprises that are out there with intent, with offerings to small businesses and what they think is going on. And then in turn, balancing against that, what are the actual buyers saying? And the one that is one of the headlines of many headlines that came out, which is really alarming, is that 80% of business to small business brands are confident that their small business customers trust them. It's just that simple question. Do you think they trust you? And the answer is 80% say yes. And then when you ask small businesses, of when you consider the large brands that serve you products and services, do you trust them? Only 40% say yes. Um, So I guess my big hairy question for you is that is one of the issues going on in the disconnect, is it trust? And if it is trust, how, when you think about that, would you suggest that trust needs to be rebuilt or reestablished?
That is a profound finding, and I'm super excited. I need to see this research as you guys get it
Mhm.
out there because it's interesting to me. My sort of response to that, both of my parents were small business people,
Uh-huh.
entrepreneurs.
Okay.
My mother launched a photography studio. My father launched a medical practice. They trusted their coworkers deeply. They did not typically trust their vendors that much, and they weren't distrustful. It's just, it's really hard to look at a company the size of, Cisco, Oracle, IBM and go, I implicitly trust that brand because
Mhm.
I don't know that trust is in brands anymore.
Mhm.
I think, trust is in people.
Mhm.
And so if there is one thing that I think brands can do to build more trust, two things, excuse me. One would be to ensure that they're putting their customers front and center
Mhm.
so that if people hear it from another customer, they will trust it in a
Mhm.
way that they won't trust it from when spoken by the brand itself. And it's got to be a relatable customer. And I see this mistake all the time where people are selling to mid-market or SMB and they
Mhm.
say, look at us, we've got, Dell as a customer, we've got Hewlett Packard. Well, that's not relatable to me. I want to hear about a business like mine. So
Mhm.
number one is I think they can rebuild trust by letting their customers do the talking.
Mhm.
And number two, they themselves as brands can probably simply work on being more human and relatable.
Mhm.
Because again, a brand is just a proxy for trust. And at this point, we place our trust in humans, not brands. So don't be afraid to be human, authentic, flawed, fallible, admit that my product's not perfect, all of
Mhm.
those things.
Right. Well spoken from a guy, head of marketing from a company named TrustRadius. So this again, this has been absolutely terrific, Russ. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I know our audience will as well. I have to have you back at least a couple of times during the year because I think that we'll both continue to be very interested in the change in that B2B buying behavior that I think is still evolving, that is still changing or becoming just moving in the directions we've been describing, but become even more so. So thanks again very much for doing this.
Thank you. It's been super exciting, and I'm really excited to hear about the research you're doing as well.
All right, thanks a lot.